Step out of the vehicle. Now, how much have you had tonight?
I need hospital, please.
Yeah, you need a hospital. Get out before I put you out.
I'm a doctor.
He thinks he's a doctor. You're a DUI. Face check my face. It's dropped. I'm looking right at you. Stop playing games. Get out.
He's doing that limp thing again.
The only thing ticking is my patience. You're going to the ground.
What Officer Miller didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man he'd just dragged onto the cold asphalt wasn't drunk. Dr. Julian Aris was dying. A massive ischemic stroke was shutting down his brain, one cluster of nerve cells at a time. And every second he spent handcuffed in the back of that patrol car was a second the city of Baltimore couldn't get back or afford. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. Dr. Julian Aris, 52, had just finished a 14-hour shift at the University Medical Center, the same hospital where, in less than a year, a jury would sit down, listen to the evidence, and decide in under 2 hours to award him $8.5 million. 4 officers would lose their careers, and Aris wouldn't keep a single dollar of it. But none of that existed yet. Not on this night. On this night, Aris was just a man trying to get home. But he was less than 3 miles away when the vision in his left eye collapsed. He did what any responsible driver would do. He pulled his Mercedes to the curb and stopped. Officer Miller saw a luxury car on the shoulder at midnight and decided, before he ever reached the window, what this was going to be. Dr. Aris wasn't just any neurologist. He was the state's top stroke specialist, the man who had literally written the emergency response handbook used across the entire tri-state area. He had spent years training first responders on exactly how to recognize what was happening to him right now. The slurred speech, the one-sided weakness, the failing vision. He had built the protocol, and the officer standing over him had failed every part of it. For 22 minutes, Dr. Aris sat in the back seat of a patrol car. But he couldn't feel his left arm. He was losing his ability to form words. The officers weren't calling an ambulance. They were laughing, trading jokes about how the rich ones always think they can talk their way out. It wasn't until Aris seized, his body convulsing against the door of the squad car, that the laughter stopped. When they finally pulled into the ambulance bay at the University Medical Center, the head nurse saw him before they even opened the door. She knew. The officers didn't. Not yet. "What did you do?" she screamed. "That's Dr. Aris." The damage, to his body, to his career, and to the city that employed the men who caused it, had already been done. The only question left was what happened next. 14 hours. That was how long, Doctor? Julian Aris had been inside the University Medical Center by the time he finally pulled off his white coat at 9:47 that evening. He hadn't sat down once. He had seen 31 patients, overseen 2 emergency interventions, and spent 40 minutes at a podium delivering a refresher lecture to a room full of paramedics on one subject, the subject he had spent the better part of 2 decades mastering: stroke. Specifically, how to recognize it, how to respond to it, and how to act fast enough to save the person drowning in it. Aris knew this material the way a pianist knows the weight of every key. It was instinct. It was muscle memory. It was the single most important thing he had ever built. He wasn't just a neurologist. He was the neurologist, the one the state called when the protocols needed rewriting. The one whose name appeared on the emergency response handbook that every first responder in the tri-state area was required to study before they ever set foot on a scene. He had written that handbook himself, every page, every checklist, every line that told an officer, a paramedic, or an EMT exactly what to look for when a person's brain began to shut down. He had trained thousands of them, cops, firefighters, ambulance crews, drilling into them the same message over and over. If the signs are there, stop what you're doing and get them to a hospital. Every minute matters, every single one. The signs were simple. That was the point. Aris had spent years distilling decades of neuroscience into a framework any trained responder could execute under pressure. Slurred speech, sudden, not chronic. Confusion or disorientation without a history of mental illness. Weakness or numbness on one side of the body, often so sudden the person doesn't realize it's happening. Vision loss, usually in one eye. These were the 4 flags. If a responder saw even 2 of them appearing at the same time, the protocol was immediate. Call it in, get the patient to an ER, and do not waste time on anything else. Aris had said this in lectures. He had written it in bold print on laminated cards handed out at training sessions. He had repeated it so many times it had become almost mechanical, a reflex he hoped every person he taught would carry with them for the rest of their career. On this night, he was carrying every single one of those flags himself. It started in the car. He was 4 miles from home, windows down, the radio off, the silence of the drive the only quiet he had felt all day. Then, the left side of his vision went dark, not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, like someone had drawn a curtain over half the world. He blinked. Nothing changed. A cold, precise fear moved through him, the kind that comes not from panic, but from knowing exactly what the symptom means. He gripped the wheel with his right hand and tried to move his left. It responded, but barely, a dull, muffled sensation, as though his arm belonged to someone else. His tongue felt thick. The words he was trying to form in his mind were dissolving before they reached his mouth. He pulled the Mercedes to the curb. He turned on his hazards. He did exactly what any alert, responsible driver would do when something was wrong. He sat still and tried to think clearly. Odd, because he knew, better than almost anyone alive, that time was the enemy now. An ischemic stroke meant a blood clot was blocking blood flow to a section of his brain. Every minute that passed without treatment, roughly 1.9 million neurons were dying. He knew this number. He had cited it in papers. He had put it on slides. And now it was happening inside his own skull, and the only thing he could do was hope someone would help him. Officer Miller's cruiser pulled up behind him less than 2 minutes later. The blue and red lights flooded the rearview mirror. Aris watched in the side mirror as the officer approached, slow, hand near his belt, already reading the scene as something it wasn't. Aris tried to lower his window. He tried to speak. The words came out broken, shapeless. Nothing like the precise language he used every single day to explain the human brain to rooms full of professionals. I'm a doctor, he managed. Miller didn't pause, didn't look closer, didn't consider for a single second that the man in front of him might be in the middle of the exact emergency he was trained, by this man, to recognize. Yeah, Miller said. Sure you are. The back seat of a patrol car is not built for comfort, it is built for containment. A hard plastic bench, no door handles on the inside, a partition of reinforced glass separating the back from the front. Dr. Julian Iris sat pressed against the right side of it, handcuffed, his wrists locked behind his back, his left arm a dead weight he could no longer feel. He said nothing. He couldn't. The words were still there somewhere inside his mind. Precise, clinical, urgent, but the pathway between thought and speech had been severed. His brain was closing doors it would never reopen. Up front, Officers Miller and his partner weren't thinking about any of that. You see the car? Miller said, pulling back onto the road. That's a new model. What does that run, 60? 70? His partner laughed. 80, easy, with the interior. Rich ones always try the same thing, Miller said, shaking his head with a performative sigh. They think if they say the right words, it all goes away. I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. Like that changes anything. Did he actually say doctor? Who knows? Half of what he said was garbage. Guy could barely stand up. They were not wrong that Dr. Aris had tried to say doctor. They were catastrophically wrong about what it meant. The clock, meanwhile, it was not waiting for them. In stroke medicine, there's a concept every neurologist, every paramedic, and every emergency room physician treats as gospel. It is called the golden hour. The term refers to the narrow window of time, ideally 60 minutes from the first symptom and no more than 90, during which a specific drug called TPA, or tissue plasminogen activator, can be administered intravenously to dissolve the blood clot blocking the brain. TPA is not a cure, it is a rescue. It physically breaks apart the clot, restores blood flow, and stops the bleed out of neurons before the damage becomes permanent. But it only works inside that window. After 90 minutes, the risk of administering it begins to outweigh the benefit. After that, the clot stays, and the brain keeps dying. Dr. Aris had written about TPA hundreds of times. He had explained its mechanism to medical students, to nurses, to first responders who would never set foot inside a hospital. He had told them, clearly and repeatedly, that every minute of delay cost roughly 1.9 million neurons. He had shown them the math. He had made the urgency unavoidable. Now he was the math. His stroke had begun, by his own estimation, around 10:02 p.m., the moment his left eye went dark. It was now 10:24. 22 minutes had passed since he had been placed in the back of this car. 22 minutes since the officers had decided this was a DUI and nothing more. The golden hour was not just ticking down, it was bleeding out. Every rotation of the squad car's wheels carried him further from the one place that could have helped him and closer to the edge of the window that, once closed, would never open again. Inside his own skull, Aris could feel it happening, or rather, he could feel the absence of feeling. The left side of his body had gone quiet, not numb the way a foot goes numb after sitting too long, quiet the way a room goes quiet when the power's cut. There was simply nothing there anymore, no signal, no response. The motor cortex on the right side of his brain, the region responsible for controlling the left half of his body, was being starved of blood, and the neurons responsible for movement, sensation, and coordination were dying in clusters, silent and irreversible. He knew which ones. He knew what they did. He knew what their death would cost him. A neurologist watching his own brain fail is not spared the knowledge of exactly how it fails. It is, in its own way, the cruelest possible version of this disease. And then his body seized. It began in his legs, a sudden violent contraction that slammed his knees against the partition. Then it moved upward through his torso, his arms, his jaw. His back arched against the plastic bench. His head snapped to one side. His eyes rolled back. The handcuffs rattled against the metal frame of the seat as his muscles fired without order, without rhythm, without any signal from a brain that was no longer sending coherent commands. A seizure, in the context of an ischemic stroke, is not a separate event. It is a symptom, a sign that the electrical activity in the damaged region of the brain has become chaotic, that the neurons are misfiring as they die, sending discharge after discharge into surrounding tissue. It is the brain's alarm system going off long after the fire has already spread. The Miller glanced in the rearview mirror. The laughter stopped. "What the hell?" He hit the accelerator. The squad car turned hard onto Memorial Drive, and 3 minutes later, it pulled into the ambulance bay of the University Medical Center, the same hospital where, on the other side of those glass doors, a team of nurses and physicians had spent the last 14 hours working under Dr. Julian Aris's direct supervision. The same hospital where, in approximately 40 seconds, everything would change. The ambulance bay doors swung open before the patrol car had fully stopped. This was not unusual. The University Medical Center's emergency department operated around the clock, and the staff inside had learned, over years of practice, to read the approach of a vehicle the way a sailor reads the sky. But tonight, the doors opened because someone inside had heard the radio chatter, a seizure in the backseat of a patrol car, inbound, ETA 2 minutes, and had already begun preparing a gurney. What no one inside knew yet was who was on it. Officer Miller was the first one out. He moved quickly, pulling open the rear door, and the moment he did, the fluorescent light from the bay flooded the back seat. Dr. Aris was still seizing. His body was rigid against the bench, his jaw clenched, his eyes open but unfocused, the kind of absence that medical professionals recognize immediately as a sign that the brain is no longer running the show. Margaret Holloway had been head nurse at the University Medical Center for 11 years. She had worked under Dr. Aris for 9 of them. She knew the shape of his face, the particular way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the slight scar above his left eyebrow from a bicycle accident in his 20s. She saw all of it in the 2 seconds it took for the light to hit him. She didn't scream right away. She moved first, fast, toward the gurney, motioning for the team behind her. Then she turned back to the officers, and what came out of her was not a question. It was an accusation. "What did you do? That's Dr. Aris." Miller didn't answer. He didn't move. Neither did his partner, who had stepped out of the passenger side and was now standing in the bay with both hands hanging at his sides, his face the color of concrete. The two of them stayed there, in the fluorescent wash of the ambulance bay, in full view of the team now rushing Aris past them on the gurney, and they did not move again for the next 11 minutes. Inside the trauma bay, the work began immediately, and it began with a question that had a devastating answer. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, ordered the first thing any stroke team orders, a CT scan to confirm the type and location of the clot and a rapid assessment of whether TPA could still be administered. The scan came back in 4 minutes. The answer took less than 1. It could not. TPA, the drug that dissolves blood clots and restores blood flow to a dying brain, has a hard limit. It must be administered within 90 minutes of symptom onset to carry a meaningful chance of reversing the damage. Doctor? B. Aris's first symptom, the sudden loss of vision in his left eye, had occurred at approximately 10:02 p.m. It was now 10:47. The window had closed 45 minutes ago. There was no clot-dissolving drug that could help him. There was no surgical shortcut. There was only the slow, agonizing process of stabilization, managing the seizure, reducing swelling, protecting whatever neurons in the surrounding tissue had not yet died, and waiting to see what was left. This is where the medical reality of stroke becomes its cruelest lesson. When a blood clot blocks an artery in the brain, it doesn't kill every neuron in the affected region instantly. The core of the blockage, the tissue directly deprived of blood, begins to die within minutes. But surrounding that core is a zone called the penumbra. These are neurons that are still alive, still receiving some blood through alternate pathways, but are in danger. They are salvageable. They are the reason the golden hour exists. TPA, when administered in time, dissolves the clot and restores flow to the penumbra, saving those cells and the functions they control. But every minute the clot remains, the penumbra shrinks. Neurons that could have been saved convert into dead tissue, and once they are dead, they do not come back. The brain does not regenerate neurons the way the body heals a broken bone. What is lost permanently. In Dr. Aris's case, the 40-minute delay had consumed the penumbra almost entirely. By the time the medical team stabilized him, the damage had already become what neurologists call a completed infarct, a region of the brain that had passed beyond the point of rescue. The specific area affected controlled motor function and sensation on the left side of his body. Dr. Chen's team spent the next 6 hours fighting for everything they could still save. They saved his life. They could not save his left hand. The diagnosis was delivered formally the following morning. Permanent motor and sensory nerve damage to the left side of Dr. Aris's body, caused directly by a delay in treatment that began the moment he was placed in the back of that patrol car and did not end until he crossed the threshold of his own emergency department. By noon, the report had reached the precinct captain. By 2 p.m., it had reached the city's legal department. By 3 p.m., an insurance adjuster was sitting in a conference room at City Hall, reading the incident report with the kind of stillness that people in that profession reserve for moments when the number on the page stops being theoretical. The city's liability policy had a cap. The adjuster's job was to determine whether it would hold. It would not. Officer Miller and his 3 partners, the 2 who had been present at the traffic stop and a 4th who had assisted with the transport, were placed on administrative leave before the end of the day. Their careers, though no one said it out loud that afternoon, had effectively ended the moment Margaret Holloway screamed in the ambulance bay. From that point forward, they were not officers who made a mistake. They were officers who had mocked a dying man for 40 minutes and called it a traffic stop. And in the weeks and months ahead, every person in that city would learn exactly what that meant. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 47 minutes. To understand why, you have to understand what the jury actually saw. They saw the body cam footage, unedited, unnarrated, exactly as it happened. They saw Dr. Aris on the ground, handcuffed, trying to speak. They heard Miller laugh. They watched the timestamp advance, 10:04, 10:11, 10:19, while the officers sat in their cruiser and made jokes about a man whose brain was dissolving. They heard Dr. Chen testify that the delay had directly and specifically caused permanent damage. And then they heard the expert witnesses explain, in plain language, exactly how much of that damage could have been prevented if a single officer had paused long enough to consider that the man in front of him might not be drunk. The jury did not need to deliberate long because the case was not complicated. It was not a question of whether the officers had made a judgment call under pressure. It was a question of whether a group of trained professionals had looked at a man displaying textbook signs of a medical emergency, signs they were required by their own department's protocol to recognize, and chosen, actively and repeatedly, to do nothing. The answer was on the tape. The number was $8.5 million. The jury wrote it down and handed it over in under 2 hours. The settlement made national headlines. The dollar figure was staggering, one of the largest in the city's history for a single incident of law enforcement negligence. Insurance adjusters, city attorneys, and precinct administrators all braced for the fallout. 4 officers were formally terminated. The city issued a public statement acknowledging the failure, and then everyone waited to see what Dr. Julian Aris would do with the money. He didn't keep it. The announcement came 6 weeks after the verdict, delivered through a single press statement that his attorney read aloud at a podium outside the courthouse. Dr. Aris was allocating the entire $8.5 million to establish a mandatory medical emergency recognition training program for law enforcement, not just in his city, but in every department willing to adopt it. The program would not be optional. It would not be a 1-hour seminar squeezed into a quarterly review. It would be a structured, multi-session curriculum built by Aris himself, designed to teach every officer on patrol exactly what he had spent 2 decades teaching paramedics and first responders: how to tell the difference between intoxication and a medical crisis, and why getting it wrong could kill someone. The psychology behind why officers fail at this distinction has a name. It is called confirmation bias, the tendency for a person to interpret new information in a way that confirms what they already believe. In law enforcement, it operates like this. An officer pulls someone over at night, sees slurred speech and unsteady movement, and immediately files the encounter under the category that fits most often: DUI. The assumption is made before the interaction begins. From that point forward, every piece of evidence, the stumbling, the confusion, the inability to form sentences, is read through the lens of the assumption already in place. Contradictory evidence, the kind that might challenge the assumption, is not ignored consciously. It simply doesn't register. The brain has already decided what the story is, and it stops looking for a different one. This is not a failure unique to police officers. It is a human cognitive pattern well documented in psychology, and it shows up in medicine, in law, in every field where professionals make rapid decisions under pressure. But in law enforcement, the consequences of confirmation bias can be irreversible. Dr. Aris's training program was built around this single idea. Before you act on what you think you're seeing, stop. Ask one question. Could this be something other than what I assume it is? One question. 5 seconds. The difference in many cases between a life saved and a life destroyed. The training room, when it opened, was located inside the University Medical Center, a deliberate choice. Officers came in groups of 12, sat in the same chairs where medical residents had spent years learning under Dr. Aris, and watched him teach. He stood at the front of the room in a wheelchair. His left hand rested in his lap, motionless. He could not grip a pen. He could not button a shirt. He could not shake a hand. The damage was visible, and it was permanent, and he did not hide it. He let them see it. He let them sit with it. And then he taught them, the same way he had taught thousands of others before, how to recognize the signs, how to respond, and why speed was not optional. Some of the officers in those early sessions were uncomfortable. A few requested transfers. One reportedly did not look up from the desk for the entire 2 hours. But the program was mandatory, and Dr. Aris did not soften it. He did not ask for sympathy. He asked for competence. The police chief's apology came on a Thursday morning, delivered in open court, in front of reporters and cameras, and every officer in the department who could fit into the gallery. It was short. It was formal. And it was, by every account in the room, the most difficult thing Chief Raymond Alford had ever done in 31 years on the force. He stood at the podium, looked directly at Dr. Aris, and said what the city had failed to say for months. We were wrong, we are sorry, and we will do better. Dr. Aris nodded once. He did not smile. He did not need to. The badge carries a specific and serious weight. It grants authority over people in moments of vulnerability, moments when they are scared, confused, or, in some cases, dying. That authority is not earned by the size of a caliber or the speed of a pursuit. It is earned by the willingness to look at a person, any person, regardless of what the first impression suggests, and ask the simplest, most important question a human being can ask another. What do you actually need? Dr. Julian Aris spent his career teaching people to ask that question. On the night of October 14th, no one asked it for him. What he did with the aftermath was not revenge. It was a correction, offered not as punishment, but as the only lesson that mattered. The next time an officer sees a man stumbling on the side of the road at midnight, the hope is not that the man will be believed because he is a doctor. The hope is that he will be helped because he is a human being. And that, in the end, is what the badge was always supposed to mean. Thank you for staying till the end. Seriously, this one mattered. The biggest lesson here isn't about Dr. Aris. It isn't even about the officers. It's about assumption. The moment you decide you already know what's happening, you stop seeing what's actually in front of you. That costs lives. Remember that. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe, share this video, and send it to someone who needs to see it. Let's make sure this doesn't stay in one room. I'm dropping another video tomorrow. You don't want to miss it. In the meantime, check out the last one right there on your screen. Let's go.